Hello and welcome to this ACMP Hong Kong 2021 webinar about deploying and managing change managers. Now, this is the third webinar in our 2021 series. And tonight we'd like to talk about why change managers, what benefits are we trying to achieve by having change managers. We're going to talk about deploying change managers and getting the best change management out of limited budget, and managing and hiring your change managers for short and long-term success. Now, my name is Richard Vernon. If you've been attending any of the webinars this year, you'll have seen me already. I'm a director here at ACMP Hong Kong. I've been in Hong Kong about 9 years, and I used to be an opera singer many years ago before I moved into consulting and project disciplines. And I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Richard Chia. So Richard, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Richard. So my name is Richard Chia. So as you'll probably know, a great thing for change managers is to be called Richard. I've been in Hong Kong for 8.5 years myself. Like Richard, I had a different career in the UK. I was a policy writer for the UK government. In Hong Kong, mostly a management consultant, performing various project roles, primarily as change manager, but also other project roles like project management, BA, and also program management.
Okay, and welcome to Richard. Richard has just joined the ACMP Hong Kong Executive Committee, so I expect we'll be seeing much more of him as well. So let's jump straight into it. So briefly, why we want to talk about deploying and managing change managers. So the current environment is full of large-scale transformation reacting to the remote customer and remote work demands from COVID, and change management has become a key instrument in project success in terms of realizing the return on investment for all these transformations. So in many projects, change management is expected to fall under the remit of a project manager or a business analyst. So we want to talk about when is this absolutely fine and when maybe is this not so good. We're also interested in where dedicated budget exists for change management. It's small, often very small. Often it's one of the things that gets dropped if there's pressure on the project. So what can we expect from a small budget and how can we use it best? And we'd like to look at what benefits we should expect to receive from having more senior change managers in our organization and what sort of career path we can offer them. And the final talking point is, what should we look for when selecting change managers? So 1 minute explainer on change managers and change management. Over to Richard.
Thanks, Rich. So for those watching that are not that familiar with change managers and change management, and generally speaking, when we talk about projects, what they want from change management is really to maximize adoption speed and quality for the new systems and processes and ways of working that are going to come in. In terms of what a change manager is, essentially it's that person that does the change management. However, the ProSci definition, and ProSci is really the organization or the body of knowledge for change management. They define a change manager as a person who plays a key role in ensuring projects that could be change initiatives meet their objectives on time and on budget. So essentially, this is guiding the people through a large-scale change transformation, and typically this is done through project scenarios. Now, I guess the question that we're posing today is really, do you need change managers to perform change management? Obviously, from an ACMP point of view, we're advocates of change management, and we would strongly prefer that they are utilized on complex pieces of work. And these complex pieces of work might be large-scale, regional, multi-year transformation programs. But what about those simpler projects, those small changes like a group email migration for a very small Hong Kong office? The balance is there. So that's the question I think we're going to pose to ourselves today.
So the first question we want to look at in a bit more detail is, why use change managers? Now, fundamentally, we want to use change managers to get a high standard of change management, as Richard has just described. change management is looking at higher overall numbers of end users adopting. It's looking at less time taken for the end users to adopt the new system and processes, and it's looking to get a greater proficiency of end users. And these are the things that justify the budget being spent on change management. Now, there's not much point in implementing expensive new systems which nobody uses. And I don't really mean that flippantly, because I've come across in my career, even recently, I've come across 2 projects which were executed seemingly perfectly. They were accepted, and 2 years later, the inquiry was how they'd go now, and no one uses them because they didn't really do the right thing. So there's always this danger that your project isn't delivering what it needs to deliver. And that can happen for a variety of reasons. It can happen because it does the wrong thing. It can happen because people just don't want to use it for whatever reason. Now, good change management is about getting this return on investment realized more quickly by getting people up to speed quickly. And it also promotes good stakeholder relations between the end users and the project teams. It gives the end users a positive experience of the quality of work being done for them. This is especially vital in long transformation programs. You get this thing, change fatigue, transformation fatigue. This is a language that's starting to emerge now in the project community. People are getting tired of doing all these projects, doing so many UAT, so many training, and it's very useful if the person helping them with that is really on their side and very good at making it as easy as possible for them. Now, the final point, that for simple work, communications and training might be performed as a secondary duty of a different member of the project team if they're skilled stakeholder managers. So we're not saying this is a person you have to have on every project, because that's simply not true, but we will have a look at when you should and when you shouldn't. So Richard, on this slide, thoughts on change saturation and fatigue?
Yeah, so I think one of the things really around that engagement with the business is that for long programs of work, frankly speaking, the business gets bored of a program of work, and they really need to have that constant engagement with the project team, and that's where the change manager comes into their own element, because what you find is project managers or BAs, they communicate with the business on a kind of as and when needed, sometimes ad hoc, sometimes there's a basic comms plan in there, but they don't have that real level of engagement, which means by the time the project comes in, if it's a waterfall project, it's like bang, surprise, and everybody goes, oh, we don't like this. Or if it's an agile project where you're trying to promise increments of change, and actually there isn't that dialogue, then every release is a release that they don't want, and they just get fed up with the program. So absolutely, change managers on any type of project, waterfall or agile or a hybrid, are totally needed.
And if I was to say, what sort of projects would you say you don't need a change manager on?
I mean, really, you should have a change manager on every project. Like you said, there's different degrees of change manager. Sometimes the change management, I suppose, function can be wrapped into another role if it's a small enough project. But really, any project that is, more than probably half a year kind of really needs a change manager.
Thank you very much. So when to use dedicated change managers. So this is the difference between when is it a luxury nice to have that we can spend a bit of surplus budget on, or when is it the key difference between success and failure. So what we think is you should use change managers on mission critical projects which rely on 100% adoption for the success of the business. That's kind of an obvious one, but there are a great many of these systems in the world where you don't have the luxury of having people who half understand it or only 2/3 of the people log in. The second time where a dedicated change manager is recommended is where you need ongoing training throughout business as usual, as the competency directly affects business success. I'm thinking especially maybe of, take Netflix, for example. Netflix, they use DevOps, they rush out releases regularly. They have releases daily sometimes. And if you're working inside Netflix, the system is constantly evolving. There's a constant need for some training. So this is where you have it full time. It's not a one-off need. The third point, use it when you want high quality training, great communications, and strong and rapid adoption in an organized manner, and a reduction in the associated risks. And from a project and program management perspective, the second you get the project manager thinking about these things as risks, if they're not managed correctly, that's when you start to have some influence, because they are risks. Now, when the project is challenging and stakeholder management and communications need to be a high standard, that's another time to get a professional in. Or when they need to be consistent with other projects and programs and not ad hoc. That's quite an important point. That's where it's, again, this change fatigue thing you get with the large transformations. It's quite important that the user's experience of training throughout different projects is reasonably consistent. And without a change manager, you're not going to get that. You might get a business analyst who knows the system very well and can do a decent job of training in one system. But the user's experience then when they go over the next new thing and the next new thing is going to be completely different, and that's not going to help you. Use change managers when you expect a lot of stakeholder resistance. Sometimes it's a system that people don't want to have implemented. They have to have it. And at this point, you need someone with empathy, because the head-on approach that a project manager or business analyst might use in negotiating and leveraging isn't the way to deal with people who are very resistant. I think you need the empathy. We'll talk more on that later on. So use dedicated change managers if the project is too big for the workload to be managed part-time by another resource. That one's pretty obvious. And then the last point, when your existing resources with capacity simply aren't skilled enough at training and communication, or aren't comfortable delivering out of their skill sets. Now, Richard, I'd like to have your input on especially training and communication, because that's what people who don't know change think change is. And there's a large difference in the degree of skill needed to train successfully versus communicate successfully. So maybe you can walk us through that.
Sure. So as you said, I think the outputs that you see from most projects around change do tend to be comms and training. Now, with communications, I think we all have an email address at work. We can all type out an email and we can communicate it to each other. And there you go, I've done the comms. It's not quite as simple as that. And I think people who do work in comms will have more of a say on that, but it's not as easy as that. There's more planning, I guess. And there's a certain art and skill in crafting messages that really truly touch and engage the end users and make them come along that change journey. So whilst it's possible to engage from a project point of view and give them the updates of this is how the program's progressing, I think there's, like I say, there's a skill there to actually uplift that, enhance the communications that you have. And obviously, the thing that underlies that is that communications and engagement plan that you agree with the business and roll out. On the training front, now, I think whilst you can probably get most of the way with just anybody kind of doing comms, I think training is a very different beast. I've seen training kind of be non-existent on projects, and once the solution's been rolled out, then the PM goes, oh, we should have probably told them how to use the system. Here, quickly, somebody do a fact sheet, and they email this fact sheet around, and that was basically it. I mean, but then there are other kind of simpler forms of training, and like quick reference guides that you can kind of roll out systematically as you get closer to go live. And then I guess there's different degrees of training. So then it might be something like classroom-led or solution-based trainings, show and tell, that kind of thing, to more, I suppose, customized training modules in a in-house system or an external system that maybe you need to work with a vendor or your own training team. And typically you have these where maybe you've got a very large company, or you're doing a global rollout to literally sort of tens of thousands of people, where you know, train the trainer just isn't enough, and you need it to be more I suppose more sort of self-service and solution-led. So as you can see, there's a very broad scope, and particularly when you're actually training people, there's a different personality of how you engage people. You know, you just can't kind of read off a sheet of paper and say, you know, click here and they do this. It doesn't work. So you do need that blended approach, and of course what underlies that is the training plan. So really looking at your user group, looking at what their training needs are, so how they learn, and then how you deliver that going forward.
Yeah, I just completely agree. There's training and training, and it's not as simple as just knowing what the thing is that you're training in. It's really understanding the perspective of the users, where they're coming from, how quickly, how skilled do they have to be in it. So that's something that dedicated change managers are very hard to replicate. So just another point on this question to you again, Richard. I should mention that when Richard talks about communications, I think before he came to Hong, he used to be writing comms for the Prime Minister from Department of Work and Pensions.
I did indeed.
You did indeed. So, you know, this is someone who knows about communications. So the other question is this: if you're spending the money on a senior change manager for your program, let's say, and quite often these days, people who are senior change managers are also double up as project managers. In this case, I know yourself and myself and plenty of our colleagues do both those disciplines. So let's say that you're the portfolio manager, and you're saying, hey, this guy is costing us this much money. Why am I deploying this guy for that price as, let's say, a change manager for a program? Instead, they could be the project manager on this tricky little project. How does the value of a change manager at program at portfolio level pay off?
Okay, so I think what I would say about this is obviously use the right tool for the right job. So if you're project managing, use a project manager. If you've got a program or a portfolio, use a program or portfolio director. Whilst it is possible for change managers to project manage and program manage, you're not using them to their best abilities, or you're not getting the best out of them. Yes, they can probably do as good a job as any other program manager, but their core skill, their difference maker is their change element. So kind of putting them into a smaller project kind of is wasting their talents. And so what I would say in this is that, you know, try to think around how you can utilize them in a different way. So can you put a more junior project manager? Maybe that's why you don't have one, because you want a senior project manager. Maybe you can have a more junior project manager in there with the support of a change manager. And one of the things that change managers do is that they uplift and they enhance that capability of people. So perhaps that change manager can actually uplift that junior project manager, and also kind of float around and help enterprise change management across the board.
And I think in Hong Kong, there's especially a preference for project managers to be technical in IT work, especially. And so actually technical project managers, I would say, are quite a lot more common than senior change managers who have got this high level of empathy. And then it's a question of working out how that helps you. And that relies on the vision of the program managers and the portfolio managers. They've got to understand that this is a really useful thing to have. Okay, so thank you on that one. So change management with a limited budget, getting the most out of it. So maybe I'll just start on this one and then I'll hand over to Richard again. But change management with limited budget, let's just start with what we want and what change managers do. So we've already mentioned many of these elements. There's communication, training, impact analysis, change strategy, creating the training scripts, having good relations with the end users, management of your executive stakeholders. There's best practice design in collaboration with the end users. There's the reporting chain. If you're the senior change manager and you're having to report on adoption or what you expect adoption to be like. There are creating examples and success stories, working with the business, showcasing how your new system, how your new process helps. And also information repositories, maybe online SharePoint repository, whatever it is. A lot of this work takes place well before go live, which is a common misconception about change management. It's a training thing. Much of this stuff needs to have been finished well before go live. Richard, can you talk to us about getting this stuff on a budget, and with these constricted budgets, what stuff would you choose if you can't have it all?
Well, I think one of the things, and kind of the number one rule in change management, is really get that senior stakeholder buy-in. So really looking at your project sponsor. And you know, this is something that goes across both change and project management, you know, getting that senior stakeholder buy-in. Because basically what happens then is that they're on your side, they're your advocate for change. They will promote change at every opportunity in steercos, et cetera. So that's rule number one. I guess then the next items I would probably say is really having a change roadmap defined and agreed with the business. That really sets out your change strategy and the plan of how we get there. Once that's done, I think on a budget or limited resources, you're looking at leveraging resources from other teams. So mobilizing your change network. So that could be within the project team itself, maybe a BA or another PM or somebody else, or it could be people within the business, maybe change agents, maybe there's some other teams that already have in-flight programs of work, and there's already people that are wanting to change and want to communicate different types of change that fall within that strategy. So those are probably the three things I'd look at. So one, stakeholder management or stakeholder buy-in, two, change roadmap, three, change network.
Okay, so if those are your three priorities, which of the actions, so actions on the, let's take the actions on the left, which of these, let's say you've only got the resource for 1 day a week, and let's say they've done those three things, what are the actions that you would prioritize and deprioritize if this is the best you've got?
Yes, good question. As I said, I think priority is the plan of what you're going to do. I think with communications and engagement, you can dial up, dial down what that looks like. So, you know, you could be communicating every day if you really had the audience, but then it could be a weekly or fortnightly, even a monthly newsletter. In terms of training, I would say there's always going to be some level of skill uplift, and I don't think you can really skimp on that. But again, you can blend the approach to being more or less kind of facilitator led to being more kind of online and self-taught.
Okay, and for training especially, what sort of model of training is the easiest to do if you're going on a budget? Now, obviously, you've already mentioned that we tune the training to the system, to the audience, to the type of users, to the business need. So let's assuming those are equal. A train the trainer approach, or which sort of approaches are the best if you've only got limited time, you can get the most value for?
I think with a lot of the questions that we'll have in this session, I think the first thing to consider is really how big is your program of work or your project. But that aside, I think it really looking at the needs of the end users. I mean, if it's a smaller piece of work, perhaps you might be able to get away with just giving them maybe like a PowerPoint type facilitator training thing and kind of switch through into the system. Maybe if you've got a larger group, maybe train the trainer might be the way to go. But I think the one size fits all model doesn't really work here, because you're talking about learning and learning needs and learning styles. So you do need to assess that. But I think what I would say is try not to skimp too much on the training and the skills, because these are the things that the end users are going to take away with them. And when the project's all gone and finished, that's what they're going to be left with. And how are they going to use the system if they don't know how to use it?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. We've been talking about you'd use change managers to avoid the problem that the users don't know or don't want to use a system. And so although we're looking at a list of things, here are some things you can do if you have very limited budget and we live in the real world, maybe the first thing you do is you push back and you try to get the budget. and you're trying to protect the key elements and say, look, why are you spending all this money on, an extra 3 business analysts over there if you're going to have a very poor level of change and adoption? So it might be a question of starting off by challenging it and helping the project manager plan accordingly. So that's one of the things senior change managers can help with. Okay, so let's have a look at hiring change managers. So just briefly, chasing the unicorn. Wouldn't it be nice if we can have change managers who have great change capability, they speak local languages, and they have technical ability? I mean, I think the most common job advert we ever see is, the trilingual change manager, CCMP certification, this example, Jira plus Photoshop. Oh, can you also know our system as well? Technical knowledge would be really useful. And in the real world, we just very rarely get all those things. And actually, we might not necessarily want those things, because if we can get them, they might be incredibly expensive. So there's this gap where, let's say you can't get the local language, but you can get a technical change manager. You're going to find the technical change managers tend to be very expensive. If they've got the certification for a certain bit of technology, they tend to raise the price. And Richard and I have actually worked with an individual like this, very, very expensive, knew the system, knew the technicality of the system brilliantly, and the change management just wasn't there. The actual quality of the change wasn't there. And then equally, if they don't have the technical ability, which is, I think, most change managers, it takes a little bit more time. And then you have the question where, let's say they're technical and they've got the languages, but they're maybe not so good at change itself. So I think it's just about appreciating that in hiring terms, we might ask for everything, but we're unlikely to get it. So getting the balance right, maybe Richard can talk about that, because I think you've hired more change managers than I have.
I have indeed. So really, when you're looking at the job market, and it doesn't give you what you want, I think you kind of have to look at compromise. So, I mean, these 3 points are things to consider. So will my change manager exclusively perform that role? Or do you need essentially a cross-skilled resource who can do pretty much a bit of everything, jack of all trades, as you will. Essentially, these people are management consultants. When is a management consultant good enough? I guess, like I said before, it really depends on what change is needed. If it's light touch, you might get away with just having a kind of generalist person. What if the project needs somebody to do a bit of BA work and a bit of this? Then actually a generalist consultant might be okay. But I think it really depends on what you're hiring for. Is that really that change manager? And what I would say with that is the larger the program, try not to split that change management resource too much, because you're hiring them for a reason. Point 2, so truly cross-skilled resources are expensive. This is what Richard was talking about. Change management as a discipline, particularly in Hong Kong, is not as popular as a BA or a PM. That means that they tend to be kind of higher in demand than your normal project resources. That's not to say that you should never hire one, because actually change managers sometimes can actually be deployed in a more senior capacity. And I mentioned this previously, where you're thinking about them as maybe overseeing more junior members of the team. So maybe they're junior BAs or junior change managers, and you might be able to oversee, a suite of projects being run by more junior people. So that could be something to think about. And the last point, if you're decided that you're going to hire a dedicated change manager, what do you look for in somebody as a change manager? Because when you get that CV, how do you know that they're a change manager, apart from they say, "Hey, I'm a change manager"? So really looking for that expert stakeholder management, great, but you'll find actually when you interview them that you'll feel that strong empathy. You'll see that they have like a natural talent for communication. They're people, and they are able to connect with end users. They'll make you feel at ease. You'll feel like you can trust them. So I think these are things to kind of look at, because if you trust them, chances are the end users are going to trust them, and that's going to make your life so much easier when it comes to delivering change.
Yeah, I'd like to hammer home point number 3. It's the difference between what I might call a natural change manager and someone who's learned how to do change, for me, is that empathy and that instinct for it. So I probably wouldn't call myself a natural change manager. I would call myself someone who's learned how to do change because I've experienced stakeholder manager. But I think the difference between yourself and myself, Richard, is that I would call you a natural change manager because you have what I might call a sixth sense for a situation that I need to logically work out and analyze. And for you, it's already there. And I've met other change managers that worked with both of us who had that instinct for it. And they were the people who, they didn't really need to know the system that well. They could learn enough about the system to do the job of training in it. And the users loved them. The users trusted them. They loved them. They had this nice role in the project where they don't really have to have any conflict of any type with the users. They don't have to negotiate scope and do pushbacks. They're there to help the users. And I absolutely think 10 times out of 10, better off find someone with that empathy, with the natural talent for it, and train them up in your system, because your users will like those people better than maybe more expert technical people who don't have the knack. So that's what we think about hiring change managers. Benefits of having senior change managers in your organization. Now, if I just quickly check the attendees, I can see some very senior change managers on the call right now. So I'll watch my words. Here we go. The benefits of having senior change managers in your organization. So as we all know, famously high percentage of projects fail. And the current trend towards that is from the requirement side, I think. So it's about get the right resources. If you get the right resources, you'll get the right requirements. If you get the right requirements, you'll get the right system or workflow. So for me, especially in Hong Kong, I see many more people trying to get the resources with the right technical knowledge. Therefore, the resources will get the right requirements. And there's this logic that says because it should work, it will work. But we would contest that the changes won't really help you if your users don't understand them, if the users don't think they're valuable, even if they are, if your users don't want to use them, even if you think they should, and if the users think the project is a failure. Now, Richard and I have both come onto a project where the users categorically thought the project was a failure, and we turned it around, delivered successfully in the end. But the battle for the first year on the project was the battle against perception. And you don't want to get to the state where the users think it's a failure because they're less willing to give you their time. They think it's a waste. So senior change managers are there to mitigate these risks. And the better they know your organization and business model, the more effective they are, which is to say the people who know exactly how you work, how you think, they know the parlance. These are the people who can generate more of a return in terms of how quickly you get your adoption, how well trusted they are. So senior change managers, as Richard said earlier, they can quickly instruct junior change managers or other resources on what matters and what priorities, and provide training to them. And in this manner, it's possible to deploy one senior resource and maybe look over 3 projects with a junior resource in each of them and just keep them flowing. Turn up at the steering committees so they can talk to the senior executives and tell them about the expectations of the change, do enough training with the junior players, attend the key meetings with the stakeholders and with the key users so that they get the sense of comfort and they get the sense they're being listened to, and actually be able to do that in 2 or 3 places at the same time, hopefully. Now, the reality is, as I'm sure Rich will say in a second, that sometimes there's just too much work, and it doesn't matter how good you are, there's too much work and you need help. So senior change managers, they're also best suited for reporting, explaining to senior executives the status of adoption on high value programs, the contribution to strategic planning, the budgeting. I don't really understand how a project manager is really supposed to budget for the change management and the adoption if they don't understand it. They don't realize that it might take several months after go live to get even to a certain level. And a senior player is going to give them a more realistic projection of this is the reality. You've spent this money on developing this thing. If you don't spend this little bit extra, you're not going to get what you want, because you don't get 100% value realization at go live. And yet so many people seem to think they do, or again, project managers, because at that point you go off the project and your job is done. So there's also the point that senior change managers are the people who can do the best quality training, such as advanced training module creation. And additionally, there's this thing about tender writing and bid assessment, where if you want to standardize the training that you expect from various vendors and things over a large program, if you want to make it easier for your users, it's very useful if your senior resource is helping you write these things, because typically in Hong Kong, the tender is the previous document you used last time, and we changed the requirements section, and stuff like training is a paragraph from 8 years ago that no one's even reviewed to see if it's really appropriate and if it's the model you want to use. Okay, so I mean, several points there which call out to me, Richard. I'm interested in which of these get to you the most.
I think the sort of second to last one, I think resonates with me. I think one of the things with more senior change managers is that they really align and weave in change management into the company's strategic transformation aims. I think just doing change well on a project by project basis doesn't really achieve that overall strategy that a lot of businesses in this day and age with digital transformation that they really want to achieve. So that's probably one of the areas where I think senior change managers can really make a difference.
Okay, thank you very much on that one. And we're coming towards the end. I think we're going to finish in time for a load of questions and comments. So, oops, my slide is, there we go. Managing and retaining your change managers. Okay, so Richard, take us through this one.
Sure. So hands up who's ever finished a project and all of your users are using the system at the right time, exactly the way they're meant to, and you have no complaints. So it's very rare.
Russ is going to put his hand up, watch.
Very rare occurrence. But I think what we find really is that once the system does go live or whatever change has happened, there's still that need of further reinforcement, which could very well justify keeping your change resource on. Other change demands might be enhancements to that particular system or fixes, ongoing work, or perhaps there's other rollouts on other projects. Maybe it's a regional project that you've done and now you're going to the next country and rolling out. So there are potential scenarios where you might want to keep your change manager on, but and obviously having their experience in that particular organization is totally valuable. But for a change manager, just jumping from project to project within an organization, is that enough? So I think one of the things I would really consider is looking at that future of change management in the organization. So what is the organization's ongoing needs? So for example, is it just project after project, or is there this idea of a commitment for transformation? Are they building something towards maybe an enterprise change management office? Maybe it's alongside or within an enterprise PMO team, and this is something that certainly interests me. The other thing is that I think in terms of career path or career plan, just being a change manager, okay, great. So what happens after that? Is there a clear trajectory of that role, or what kind of roles would you be able to step in after being a change manager, a senior change manager? Maybe you're looking at transformation director and leading big pieces of work from a very sort of change position. So again, that would be something that I'd be looking at. And finally, just in terms of managing change managers, obviously change managers are people, so they obviously value positive and supportive relationships, and just communicate with them honestly and often provide that clear vision and direction, and they'll do the rest for you.
Yeah, I agree with every point there, and I think I just agree. It's about understanding what you want from it, and some companies, they really do only want some change management support at a go live. They don't really expect to have many enhancements after that. They don't really expect to have ongoing needs for change management, in which case they should be probably using contractors. So I think it's about the business understanding its need and then planning, like you say, planning for what they want from it. And I do like the idea very much of embedding alongside or within a PMO, because I think it's an aspect of delivery which is as yet underappreciated, especially in Hong Kong. I'd say undervalued. I don't think that the Hong Kong market quite understands, or maybe it is that they don't really associate change with the thing that unlocks the return on investment. I was talking to a Hong Kong CIO of one of the major banks here, and they said to me, "Isn't change management what your project manager does at the end of a project?" And it seemed to him that it was. And this is a CIO, and I can't imagine how many project managers he has, and that's the mindset. And obviously that you won't have that mindset if it's not working. So in some capacity, it was delivering enough. But I think there's a conception barrier in Hong Kong that says really how valuable this stuff is, and therefore, why you'd want the senior change managers, why you'd want to really incentivize your young people to stay, because if you just do one project, then another project, then another project, and there's no such thing as a senior role, there's no chance of doing change at a program level or a high level than that, then what incentive is there to stay? So, it's a market maturity thing, but again, only if it fits your organization. Okay, that was managing and retaining your change managers. And so we're near the end. So the quick list of do's and don'ts. The quick recap. So do understand the value of empathetic change managers who make people feel at ease. We do think this is more important than technical skills for the role in most cases. And we think it's something that's actually harder to learn. It's hard to teach someone empathy. Technical skills they can catch up with. Do ensure that when resources are limited, whatever you have is 100% directed to your change strategy and properly planned. It's as Richard said earlier, don't try and spread it too thin and do 10 things at the same time. Pick the 2 or 3 things, do them properly, start off with your stakeholder buy-in. Encourage your change managers to pick up as much business knowledge as possible to maximize the value they can bring. This is also something with career prospects, because like Richard said, you might find your change managers who perform well are looking at other roles within the organization, and they will rely on having picked up this business knowledge to make them valuable. Do allocate senior change management to your complex and high value projects. This isn't the place to skimp on resources, because it's so frustrating to have done everything right up until this point, and then you go too cheap, you don't estimate quite how difficult it's going to be, and suddenly you have this massive perception gap between the project and the management and how they think it went and the users, and you just don't want to entertain that. Don't start thinking about change management towards the end of a project. Many of the activities should be completed or underway well before go live, well before UAT. Plan from the start. It's not something which you can suddenly wrap in at the end of a project in most cases. Don't underestimate the ability of users to reject projects that do all the right things because they don't understand them or because they don't like the idea of the project. Plan for expected resistance. Again, there's this conception that if we do A plus B plus C, therefore the users must like it, and it just doesn't work like that sometimes. Don't rely solely on vendor training at the end of an implementation to be sufficient for critical work. As we said, change management begins near the start of the project, and the perception of the quality exists well before go live. So supplement with your own resources as necessary. What I would say there is that your users' perception of you exists all the way through the project, exists every steering committee meeting, every facilitated workshop you do, they're judging your quality. Every time you take some bugs, you come back and fix it, they're judging your quality. Every interaction, they will have a very firm idea of whether they think that you know what you're doing or you don't know what you're doing well before go live. And people who are asked to start using a system that they've heard bad things about, it's just not a place you want to begin from. Okay, so have you got anything else to add to that list, Richard, or any of these that are particular favorites of yours?
You've covered it really, but I would probably say really assess your project and the complexity of work when you're looking at the resourcing.
Okay, so that's about it. Thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed this brief look. We've picked a whole load of what we thought were very interesting points, and every one of them would stand a 2 or 3 hour discussion easily. So it's quite light touch. Please have a look at our other ACMP Hong Kong chapter webinars, and we are looking forward to planning some face-to-face events later in 2021. We're quite excited because we're people, and we want to get back into making contact with people. So let's open it up for discussion and questions. Happy to take questions, happy for any of the experienced change managers who I can see right there sitting on our attendance list to jump in and just have some of their thoughts about some of the things we've talked about or extra bits of advice. We've got a Q&A question there. We'd love to hear from you both on examples of projects where change management has been done well and been done poorly, and what the key differences were, from Simon Jones in the UK. So Richard Chia, what was the difference between a project where you felt it was done well and a project where you felt it was done badly?
So the projects that tend to be, that I've been on where they've tended to be bad, is where the wrong people for the job were selected. So essentially they were not really change managers, but we thought they were, or the business said that they were, and they didn't have that right connection. They didn't connect with the end users. So that's probably where I'd say that it's been done badly. In terms of where it's been done well, probably those projects where everything's planned from the beginning. There's a clear plan and it starts early. Those are the ones that tend to be best.
Yeah, and I'll add, for me, my memory of a project done well was a very difficult project, but the change management on the project was done very well and was much more successful than a lot of the earlier stages of the project. And one of the reasons it was good was because the business understood the ongoing need. So they put someone in a role which was semi-change manager, but also facilitating the business ongoing for several months after BAU. And this person was championing how to use the different things. They were helping organize the data. So data is a large element that comes out of system implementations. And when you're designing the implementation, it's not necessarily always that easy to visualize quite how the data is going to be used. You plan for it, you create it, but actually until people start using the system, that's when you find out what happens. So the organization took a change role, they combined it with sort of a semi-project management role post go live, and they managed the data, they managed best practices, and really this emergent skill in using the system. So that was done really well. Okay, thank you very much for your question, Mr. Simon Jones. Is there anyone else who'd like to have a question or like to comment? How do you find ways to increase the change management budget? Ooh, okay, Richard?
Ooh.
Hard one.
It is.
It's like butting your head against a wall.
Essentially, yes. I think it's really on going back to your project initiation document. So really looking at the return on investment, the benefits that are promised at the very onset. I think that's where you need to start reassessing, are these going to be realized? If not, then why not? And if it's purely a sort of people related ROI situation, and that's where you need to hammer home and say, actually, this is where we need extra resources to ensure that that system is now going live and we get that return on investment.
And it's also about setting up for success by understanding early on in the life cycle of the project that you have set the expectation correctly. So you have set up the parameters. You've said, look, guys, this is what we're expecting, but if this doesn't work, these are the consequences. So if that's established very early on that the change management is a very big deal, and this is what we're budgeting, this is our plan, but we'll have to see if it works, you're in a much stronger footing to try and adjust that than if it gets sort of pushed back a little bit at the beginning, not that important, we'll allocate a little bit of budget, see what happens. And then suddenly it's a big problem emerging where, oh, hang on, we didn't think this was going to be a problem. And that's when you'll find it more difficult to negotiate budget. So again, it's one of those reasons to have a senior change figure helping right at the beginning, because you just set the expectation? That's a good question. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and my thanks to Richard Chia for joining us for his first webinar and providing expert change advice. And we look forward to telling you more about what we're doing at ACMP Hong Kong later this year. We're having a meeting next week to work out what our next events are going to be, and we're all very excited to see if we can find some way of doing it face-to-face, because we really prefer those, and we look forward to getting a good attendance if we can get it face-to-face. So thank you very much, and have a nice evening.